Good morning, dear students. In today's lecture, we'll discuss about disaster management. So let's start our today's topic. Disaster is a serious disruption to the functioning of a community that exceeds its capacity to cope using its own resources. Disaster can be caused by natural, man-made, and technological hazards, as well as various factors that influence the exposure and vulnerability of a community. So, the term disaster was originated from a French word which is désastre, a combination of two words. Des means bad and astre means star. Thus, the term disaster refers to bad or evil star. The disaster leads to heavy losses in terms of human, animal, and plant life loss, injuries and disabilities, as well as damage to property and environment. The World Health Organization defines a disaster as a sudden ecological phenomenon of sufficient magnitude to require external assistance. The disasters can occur anytime and anywhere. Some of the disasters can be predicted well in advance, whereas there are some disasters which cannot be predicted, and such disasters result into heavy loss of life and property. Now we'll talk about the types of disasters. Based on its origin, the disasters can be classified into two categories, and those are natural disasters and man-made disasters. The natural disasters are further classified into three categories. The first of which is meteorological disaster. The meteorological disaster is a disaster caused by extreme weather conditions and is referred as a meteorological disaster. Such disasters are usually related to sudden and adverse changes in the weather or weather forming processes. The examples of meteorological department could be floods, cyclones, hurricanes, typhoons, snowstorms, thunderstorms, droughts, hot and cold waves. The another type of natural disaster is geological disaster. Geological disaster is a natural disaster that is caused by geological processes. The various types of geological disasters are earthquake, volcanic eruptions, landslides, tsunami, mud flow, etc. In the previous lectures also we have discussed many times that earthquake and volcanic eruptions are the disasters that happen because of collision in the tectonic plates, as well as eruption of lava from the mantle region of Earth's interior. So, any disaster which is resulted by the geological processes of Earth is termed as geological disaster. The third type of natural disaster is known as environmental or biological disaster. Sometimes it is also termed as ecological disaster. This disaster is defined as a catastrophic event regarding the natural environment and that is due to human activities. The common examples of environmental or biological disasters are global warming, climate change. We know that these uh, disasters happen due to man-made activities, a release of harmful toxic gases into the environment that increases the temperature of Earth and causing additional warming of this globe. Then another type of environmental disasters could be ozone layer depletion. Recently, the epidemic caused by COVID-19 pandemic is also an example of environmental or biological disaster. The other examples could be plague, etc. So these are three different types of natural disasters. Now, the man-made disasters are disasters which are caused due to man-made activities, and again, man-made disasters are further classified into three categories. The first type of man-made disaster is technological disaster. A technological disaster is an event that is caused by a malfunction of a technological structure and some human error in controlling or handling the technology. The examples of technological disasters could be transport accidents, explosions, fires, structural failures, etc. Another type of man-made disaster is known as industrial disaster, and industrial disasters are an event which are caused by widespread destruction or distress and is usually occurs suddenly or over a short period of time, and is also limited to fires or explosions in industrial settings or to chemical or radioactive releases from industrial point sources. The examples of industrial disasters could be chemical spill, gas leaks, radiations, etc. We have seen an incident which took place in India in the past, in the form of release of methyl isocyanate gas from a chemical plant located in Bhopal, and this has led to death of so many people, and this was considered as one of the most severe industrial disaster so far happened in India. So another type of man-made disaster is warfare. The warfare disaster is created by the failure of the leadership to resolve conflicts constructively, and is often brings out the worst in the opponents through the goal of destroying each other. The types of warfare could be a war between two nations, civil unrest, as well as terrorism in any country. So these are different types of disasters which can be classified as natural and man-made. Now we'll discuss about the effects of disaster. We know that disaster leads to uh, very strong disturbance in the environment. It also leads to the death of human beings, animals, plants, etc. The common effects which could be seen out of any disaster are population displacement, because the place where disaster occurs does not remain suitable to live. Therefore, the local residents has to be displaced. So, one of the major effect is population displacement. Another effect could be injury or death of human beings, animals, etc. And after the disaster, the most common thing that could be seen is spread out of the epidemic diseases. It can also lead to damage of infrastructure, especially in the case of floods, earthquakes, cyclones, typhoons, etc. Because the people who faces such disasters, they lost their near and dear ones. They also lost their savings, properties, and it also disturbs to their day-to-day life, and therefore resulting into various types of psychological problems. It also causes scarcity of food in that area, and there are incidences of socio-economic losses to the places where disaster occurs, and disaster also results into shortage of drugs and medical supplies. So these are the effects of disasters which could be seen at any place where any natural or man-made disaster has happened. So now we'll talk about the factors which affect the severity of a disaster. The impacts of the disaster depends on a lot of factors such as predictability. If any disaster can be predicted well in advance, then we get enough time to prepare ourselves, as well as vacate the people from the place where disaster is expected to be happen, and in such cases the impact would be less. But if the disaster is spontaneous, and if we cannot get enough time to prepare ourselves, in such cases the impacts are very stronger. The disasters such as floods, cyclones can be predicted well in advance. So this helps in preparedness to handle such disasters. Another factor that affects the severity of a disaster's impact is type of disaster. The disaster such as earthquake leads to high mortality due to death of people due to collapsing of the buildings and heavy objects. So earthquakes is considered as one of the most severe disaster that brings extremely adverse impacts to the people and surrounding environment. The another factors which affect the disaster impacts are density and the population distribution. If the place where disaster occurs uh, is densely populated, then impacts are more stronger. And if the uh, people density is not so high in any place, and uh, this will this will result into minimizing the impacts. And warning opportunity is another factor that affects the severity of the disaster impact. If early warning system uh, can be used to warn the people about the upcoming disaster, then the impacts can be minimized. The next thing is environmental conditions. If the environmental conditions are suitable for the disaster management and post disaster uh, relief activities, then the impacts could be minimized. So these are the factors which affect the severity of a disaster's impact. Now, talking about India's vulnerability to the disasters, we know that India is a land which is exposed to number of disasters such as earthquakes, floods, cyclones, droughts, tsunamis, etc. If we talk about the vulnerability of disasters in India, 59% of land in our country is vulnerable to earthquakes. Out of this, 10.9% is vulnerable to severe earthquakes. The 5% of land is vulnerable to floods in India. Near about 8.5% of land is vulnerable to cyclones, and this is mostly the coastal area of India. Roughly 68% land of India is vulnerable to droughts. The northern mountains of India are prone to landslides, earthquakes, and snowstorms, whereas the coastal area of eastern India is prone to cyclones. The western deserts of India are prone to drought. So, if we look at these data, we can easily see that India is vulnerable to number of disasters such as earthquakes, floods, cyclones, droughts, etc. The This map shows the earthquake hazard vulnerability of India. So you can see that this map shows the places where earthquake has occurred previously. It shows the faults, thrust, and earthquake of magnitude more than 5 in the past. So you can see that almost the entire northeastern part of India, the northern region of India, is vulnerable to earthquakes. The map on the right side shows the flood hazard map of India. So the, the the regions which are colored with orange color shows the areas where the frequent flood occurs every year in India. So almost entire northern to northeastern state of India, northeastern region of India is exposed to the floods, and the region of West Bengal, some part of Odisha is also exposed to the floods in India. So we have another map showing the cyclone occurrence in India. So it is clearly visible through this map that entire coastal area of India, especially the eastern coastal area of India, is severely exposed or severely prone to the cyclones. Uh, the states such as West Bengal, Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana are uh, prone to the cyclones, and also every year we hear about two to three cyclones, major cyclones that hit the eastern coast of India. Next map is about the landslide incidence of India. The red dots depict the occurrence of landslides in the past in India. So, uh, this was to make you familiar about the occurrence of various types of natural disasters in India at different regions. So, that was all about today's lecture. Uh, in the next lecture, we'll talk about the management of disasters, especially the management of disasters caused by floods, earthquakes, landslides, etc. So that was all about today. Thank you very much.